of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tristero. Chapter 150. Hell. Part 2. Feeling his body finally return to his usual range of motion was like taking a breath after being underwater for too long.
Take off his blindfold. Wakasama wants him to get a good look at the facility and what I could do to it.
However, with no tools to access and no way of truly knowing where he was or how to escape, even if he could get a few good licks in, for now, he'd play the role of cowed prisoner.
Well, alright, if that's what the boss wants. Oi, tin guy, you get the straps and I'll take the mask. Oh, and those wedding bands, too.
It'd be illogical to throw his health away until he knew what he was up against, wouldn't it? Even if the feeling of his rings vanishing right along with the eye mask stoked the fires of his ire, because, thinking about a situation rationally, Rappa had asked that he not be harmed, and to that end, he needed to see how far he could push that bargain made on his behalf, didn't he? Because for the moment he was valuable enough that hurting him was off the table. That was an advantage he'd needed to hold on to for now. He was sure his family were already frantic. He'd make his way back to them as wholly as possible, as quickly as possible, and that, as hard as it was, would have to be his main focus, his legendary patience now coming into play.
Alright, Aizawa, unless you want to be dragged along by your hair, you're going to behave yourself, you hear?
Huffing, he looked up at the men looming over him and nodded. His hands were still bound from when they'd snatched him off the street. However, at his submission, the bulky man unsheathed the dagger from the back of his pants and cleanly sliced through the ties keeping his ankles together. Then, after a tense couple of seconds, they started exiting the van through the open back doors behind him, the blond man offering him a hand. Pointedly ignoring the gesture, he easily pulled himself into a sitting position before working his legs into a stand. And his eyes not meeting that amused gaze even once, he walked past the fiend dressed in blackened Buddhist robes and stepped onto the gray cement of
an underground garage?
Frowning lightly, he took in the featureless, wide-spanning walls and low ceilings whilst pushing away irrational feelings of claustrophobia aside. He couldn't afford to give in to such things. Weaknesses could be exploited. He couldn't allow them to find any beyond what he wanted them to see.
But he sure lives up to his reputation, don't he?
Sliding his eyes to another blonde, he offered him a glare for his trouble, but said nothing.
Oh, now that's a look! The bastard did it, no doubt trying to rile him up further. I think you'll fit right in here. Got that, son?
However, he wasn't one for idle chit-chat with criminals, and so he continued to hold his tongue. You tended to learn more from villains and their schemes when you allowed them to run their mouths, after all.
Knock it off, Setsuno. Now come on, we're heading this way today.
Stowing that piece of information away for later, Shouta followed the burly leader, his gaze carefully slipping from him to the skinny prick still playing with his rings, to the fourth member of those who'd abducted him. He was completely covered in an ivory getup, aside from the dull brass and brown-beaked mask he wore. The soulless black eye holes peering out of that face covering ensured that the other could see him looking at his costumed form, though. We referenced your court quite a bit over the last few years, so I know a great deal about you, eraser hero. You're obviously wondering why you're here, and why you're being treated so nicely, yes? A voice younger than he was expecting asked blandly. Well, you're much more useful to us alive, so please don't worry on that account. Keeping his face ruthlessly neutral whilst continually observing the spacious, mostly vehicle-free area, the eatery owner decided to end his silence for now. This man wore an expensive getup, which suggested he was an influential member of this mafia gang. This in turn meant that he'd have information worth knowing, wasn't it?
So, all of this is about my quirk?
He asked their group, still heading straight for the featureless gray wall within the parking lot that didn't have any vents, grates, windows, or doors that he could see.
I find that a little hard to believe,
he added, the incredulity of his tone unabated.
Don't sell your mutation so short, Aizawa. Erasing quirks? Well, that's an ability Overhaul finds very appealing.
The fully covered man shrugged.
Overhaul?
He queried. his right brow arching.
"Where's your new boss?"
The brute grunted, his left meaty hand now shoved into the pocket of his oversized slacks, as he grasped at something and pulled it out for him to see. Oh, shit.
"You know what this is, Eraserhead?"
Swallowing thickly, Shouta narrowed his gaze upon the luminous green substance slightly bubbling away in its glass canister, the liquid preloaded into a gun-like dispenser and ready to use.
"It's Trigger,"
he breathed the late nights after work he'd spent studying such things with Marai coming to the fore.
"Bingo!"
The older man snickered, and then in one fluid motion he jammed the needle-tip mechanism into his neck and allowed the quirk-enhancing drug to course through his system with a roar. Scowling, the cafe owner could do nothing but watch as the man's muscles quivered and grew whilst his veins writhed beneath his skin.
That's the mustard,"
the fiend breathed before a snickering chuckle bouncing around the cavernous chamber. He strode into the wall and merged with it. If this place had no actual exits other than him, then getting the fuck out of here would be virtually impossible, wouldn't it?
"Come on, then."
The room itself seemed to call as the masonry warped and tore open to form a gaping hole that Haggie's hand, at the small of his back, was guiding him towards.
"It's best not to keep Wakasama waiting."
Walking through the oddly distorted corridors was one thing. However, the glimpses of rooms he was given along the way were quite another. He'd seen a corridor filled with cages just big enough to house a person. The scent of disinfectant had made his nose burn and his throat itch. Then there was some kind of laboratory, the area similarly sterile and precisely marked out with stainless steel tables, beakers, flasks, Bunsen burners and the like. Charts concerning progress made, posters showing human anatomy, and scientific equations dotted the walls, and a handful of whiteboards containing small, neat writing. The worst thing he'd seen, however, was a chamber set out like a dentist's suite. There were 2 chairs, 4 trolleys hosting trays brimming with sharply glinting instruments, alongside what looked like blood siphoning equipment, the kind that blood donation stations used. That had unnerved him. However, now he knew why they'd talked about his quirk so much. Why they'd talked about him being owned. They were planning to use him as some kind of guinea pig, weren't they? They wanted his power for whatever reason, and harvesting his blood was definitely a way to analyze and potentially cultivate such things, wasn't it? Vaguely he wondered just how pissed Shigaraki would be to know that a ragtag group of Yakuza was messing with the kinds of science only New Eden would allow. Overhaul clearly didn't want to toil away under the old fiend's watch, at any rate, did he?
"Nah, Mimic. Show him the kitchens before we meet up with the boss, would you?"
Feeling his eyebrows arch, Shouta turned his incredulous gaze to the tittering Setsuno.
"You've got to be joking."
"Nope," the skinny thief snickered, whilst the wall to his right gaped into another hole. "Thanks to Rappa, we've been enduring all kinds of goodies made by this talented hands of yours," he tweeted, the hand not touching the only jewelry he valued, waving at the kitchen. Snorting, he regarded the small room featuring worktops, 2 electric ovens, a mixer, rice cooker, and some other bits and pieces, with a huff.
"So you're expecting me to earn my keep?"
"Yeah, see? He is smart. The scrawny little shit-brain. Sorry, it's not up to your usual standards, but we bought a bunch of stuff for you to make us. Oh, and although I'm sure you wouldn't dream of trying to poison anyone, you gotta know that you'll be eating with us, and with Rappa still hanging out with all of those cute kids and old fogies, well, you make one wrong move, and..." He left off with a wink, an index finger pulling dramatically across his pencil neck. Smoothing his face into a cold look of contempt, he chose to say nothing. He knew that they'd be held to ransom to ensure his good behavior the second he'd been allowed to walk by himself. They were counting on his bleeding heart to keep him in check, and whereas that might be true, they'd also failed to realize just how many friends he had. Just how many contingencies he and them had put in place after Shigaraki-san walked free. Therefore, for today and tomorrow, he'd play ball. He'd go along with their orders, because by Monday, Toshinori would be home. Nezu would have gathered all of his precious people and their families up and into UA. Pros would be posted in strategic places around his community to keep tabs on those who'd still need to go to work. Marai would subtly and covertly look at everyone potentially suspicious with his quirk, and Rabba hadn't been with them for very long, not in an official capacity of overall trust anyway, had he?
Alright, chronostasis. Is he supposed to meet Eri and the others now, or?
No. No, the ivory-cloaked youth answered as they resumed their walk towards the amorphous tunnels, Henki's hand once again palming his back before he pulled away.
But that's enough touring for now, Mimic-san. Bring us to Overhaul.
Feeling relieved when he was the only one expected to step into the office, Shouta allowed his eyes to roam around the place whilst walking towards the setup of 2 couches with a coffee table between them. On one of the dull brown pieces of furniture lounged a young man dressed in black pants, a matching shirt with a white tie, his shoulders capped by a green jacket sporting a purple ruff of feather-like fur. The lower half of his face was covered by an ornate beak, and behind him, a true version of the ancient plague doctors he'd seen in history books growing up stood, the man's form completely hidden from head to toe. The chamber, similarly, gave precious little away. There was a banner on the wall behind his abductors, a pair of bookshelves, and nothing else of note besides the plain wooden door.
Yagi Aizawa Shouta. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
Returning his attention to the young clan head, the eatery owner shrugged noncommittally.
You can call me Razorhead if you prefer.
He offered, his sneaker-clad feet itching to move, but since he didn't know how volatile this man was, he decided to stay put.
No,
the brunette replied bluntly, those intelligent eyes sharpening, before he leaned further back in his seat and gestured at the other couch.
Seat, he ordered. I'm not a dog,
he replied before he could think better of it, his glare narrowing as the other blinked at him, whilst the blackened figure behind the couch hissed.
Oi! He bristled. If Wakasama tells you to do something, then...
It's fine, Nemoto. Overhaul chuckled, his posture relaxing further. Shouta-san is right, after all. You'll forgive my lack of manners and take a seat, though, won't you? Allowing his throat to hum, he carefully approached the sofa opposite the man responsible for his abduction and lowered himself upon it, their eyes locking once more. So, why are you here, Struggling not to roll his eyes, the rookie pro was about to answer when he felt something odd. Slipping his analytical stare from the white glove wearer to his associate, the knowing laugh told him all he needed to know. Ah, so your quirk makes you sensitive to those of others when the power is upon you. That's interesting. I'll have to add it to your notes. He mused, his right hand gesturing at the mysterious figure who'd become so upset at his master's behest. Nemoto's mutation forces truthful answers from others, whether he asks the questions or not. He shrugged nonchalantly.
I see,
he replied.
To answer your question, then, I think I'm here because you want to use my blood to make something.
He added, his tone calm and expression the same neutral mask he's always adopted when facing down such difficult situations. You're partially right. The crime lord nodded, his head cocking to the side. By itself, your quirk could be useful and could amp up the potency of what I've already made, he mused. However, it's not just the sickness of your blood that I require. No, you have other skills that I'll be sure to put to good use, he stated, the cruel lilt of his tone setting his teeth on edge. But before we get into the finer details of such things, let's go over the basics, shall we?
Oh boy, he thought. Here we go.
Escape from this compound is impossible, the youth told him bluntly. Your community is under surveillance, and should you attempt to run away, harm any of my assets, or take your own life before I'm done with you, I'll take your feet first, and then your hands, before forcing you to watch one of them die. He stated, his words icy and tone resolved. You'll not be able to keep those people who leech off of you fed without your appendages, and your adoring little group of children will never be the same for the experience, will they? So do you understand those rules and the consequences?
Yes.
He bit out his teeth, grinning. Good. The younger nodded, those gold irises slipping back to Nemoto. Leave us, he ordered, and tell Harry to bring Eri," he added, the completely covered villain bowing without hesitation and striding primly to the door. Keeping his cool was going to be difficult, wasn't it? "You know, you and I are a lot alike, Shouta-san." Balking, but keeping his mouth shut, the eatery owner regarded the other carefully as white fingers moved to pluck the king from his side of the shoji board. "We both uphold the virtues of cleanliness. We have a legacy that we've grown and strive to maintain. And before you became a pro, before you literally married into that diseased ideology, I had every hope of curing you from your quirk sickness, your chronic case of heroism, and inviting you to join us properly," he continued as though he was sane, as though anything he'd just said made a lick of sense. Maybe Atsuhiro was right. Maybe he was a magnet for the deranged and dangerous. However, as Nezu had taught him, when being held hostage, appearing to be sympathetic was key. If he could keep the man running his mouth, then he'd have more to work with, wouldn't he?
"One of your men said that you've been keeping tabs,"
he admitted calmly.
"and if you have, you'll know that I have no interest in criminality other than stamping out what causes it,"
he reminded, their eyes locking once more.
"What else do you want from me?"
he asked.
"You've taken my rings. You know who my husband is. So I'm assuming a ransom situation is also at hand,"
he continued when the other remained silent.
"Do you need funds for whatever medical work you're pursuing?"
"In the first instance, yes," the mafia leader hummed. "That, however, is only in the short term," he informed mildly. "Do you know how quirks first came to be?" Resisting the urge to sigh, Shouta instead shook his head. "If you do, I've traced it back to a virus, you see, a virus bred in rats. Like the plague," he murmured. "And like the plague, such things need to be stamped out." He breathed, a dangerous glint flashing across his eyes. "That is why you're here. I have found a way to do it. I have created a serum that can wipe out quirks permanently. It is almost perfect," he sighed politely. "But I need more money to get production off the ground," he conceded. "Then once I begin selling the quirk-killing bullets, I'll double my investment by selling a quirk rejuvenation serum. All the villains and pros alike eating out of the palm of my hand, and finally, the Shia Hasakai will be the ruling class once more, our honor bestowed and the world at our feet." He all but purred the shogi piece he held, flipping into the air before he snatched it back into his grip. Allowing what he'd heard to sink in, the raven-haired man exhaled a breath. That was a whole lot of crazy, wasn't it? The irony of having the #1 pro, who has only become famous through his power, be the one to supply the funds necessary for wiping out such powers is quite delicious, isn't it?
"It's... what you're proposing is certainly ambitious,"
he managed incredulously, his tone more patronizing than it probably should have been. "Oh, you think I'm joking?"
"Well," he countered, his voice unwavering, "I think you believe that you're serious,"
he offered.
"Your clan must be pretty sizable to manage such a thing,"
he furthered, the other's brows twitching a little annoyance.
"That's without all for one sniffing out what you're doing."
"That fossil is too busy playing in that new nirvana of his to care about this world," the younger cut in dismissively, his voice darkening a touch. "But you understand why I'm telling you all of this, don't you?"
"Because to your mind I'm not leaving you alive, am I?" He acknowledged a tremor of fear that he refused to allow, trying to trip down his spine.
"There is, to my mind, no reason for you to die, Shouta-san. That fire in you, that desire to leave, that ill-placed sense of hope for your freedom, yes. But you, no. No, I have plans for you, and to that end," he added with a huff as he stood, "I'd like to introduce you to your new daughter."